Hello, 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 everyone, you wonderful, beautiful, amazing basement-dwelling Greek mythology nerds. Um, y'all are weird, so am I, whatever. Welcome back. I just did one of these episodes before I went to sleep, and now that I've awoken, I was like, you know what? I'm not really doing anything, so might as well record another Protaly Rant. And I wrote this down before I went to sleep because I'm like, oh my god, I just had a great idea. And then I realized, hey, I don't know all that much about Egyptian mythology, but I know about the history of it, so let's do that. So, here's the thing. In the last video, I mentioned that Kronos was not ever the king of the gods to the Greeks. You had Poseidon as the king of the gods, and then Zeus as king of the gods, right? And that changed during a time called the Greek Dark Ages, right? So after the Bronze Age, so the Bronze Age was this time of great centralization in the Near East, right? Greece, the Hittites, Egypt, Assyria, all of these places started to have more central control. Trade was booming. Business is booming. Anyway, so I mentioned briefly there that Indo-European mythologies tend to have what is the word? They tend to have linearity to them. They change over time, and that reflects in their myths, but not always. However, the Egyptians are probably the greatest example of history-changing mythology. So, with the help of my handy-dandy, just on the other side of that camera, list of Egyptian dynasties from 1 to 32. There's a shitload of them. We're not going to talk about all of them. We're just going to talk about the big changes. So, specifically, the King of the Gods. Why did the King of the Gods change so much throughout Egyptian history? So, let me just give you the rundown. At the beginning of Egyptian history, the King of the Gods was Horus. He is the falcon god, the god of the sky, and all of that. And then after Horus, you have Ra as king of the gods. You know, the sun god. And then after Ra, you have Set, who is a war god. Then after Set, you have Montu. Why did I say that like French? Montu. And then after that, you have Amun-Ra, who essentially gets you to the end of Egyptian history. There's a few gods here and there, like the Nubians only worshipped Amun and not Amun-Ra. And what's the word? Oh, and during the times where you had the Ptolemies in charge, which was basically after Alexander the Great conquered Egypt, that was the general who essentially got Egypt, Ptolemy, and his family was in charge for 300 years. Go watch the Cleopatra video. But there they kind of hybridized Zeus and Ra and Amun. Anyway, so let's start with Horus. He is not water. He is not water. But Horus is the god of kings. Specifically, he's the god of the pharaohs. Every single pharaoh, from the very first in Menes to the very last in Cleopatra the 7th, every single one of them had 5 different names. One of these names was their Horus name. This is the name they get once they become king. Now also, Originally, pharaoh was not the word. Pharaoh means household, or it meant something close to palace or house, which eventually became what they called the king. But king was really the word for most of Egyptian history. I digress. So Horus is the god of kings, essentially. Kind of like Zeus is the god of kings. And he was one of the few deities worshipped across all of Egypt, right? So just like the Greeks, the Egyptians they all worshipped all of the gods, but each city or region had their god, right? Their guy. And while in Greece, that tended to be more like, if you're a coastal town, your guy is Poseidon. If you're a small town that only has trees or nature to sustain you, your guy is Demeter. If you're fucking Sparta and all you have is soldiers and slaves, your guy is Ares. And then you turn every other god into Ares. Go look up War Aphrodite. You will not regret it. Anyway, I digress. So you have these local gods, right? Every city has their own god. And unlike Greece, it's not as like regionally based. Like every city in Egypt is on the Nile. Like I can only name one that it is not, and that's in the middle of the fucking desert, right? It's called Siwa. And all of these cities have their own gods. So there's 30-something dynasties in Egyptian history. They don't all come from the same city. So when a new city essentially becomes the capital, because whoever united Egypt that time, was from that city's regional god kind of tended to become the main one. So, for example, that's more mid-Egyptian history. So, Horus, like I mentioned, was one of the few gods that everybody worshipped, right? Because he's the god of the sky and he's the god of kings. And like I mentioned last episode, everyone has a king, so everyone worships the god of kings. And that starts to change during the third dynasty. The third dynasty is when they built the very first pyramid. So, the city of Heliopolis was started to become a major center of this local god called Ra. Ra was the god of the sun. So, tell me, in Egyptian society, there are only two things that everyone sees, or that everyone always has. You always have the sun. Sorry, there's three. You always have the sun, you always have the Nile, and you always have the king. So, what is the best way to associate the king with the sun? Because if you look at the sun, you can't ever look at the king, right? That's not something you're allowed to do. You can't just pop into the palace and be like, "Oh, hello, Ramses. Might I say you're looking ravishing this morning." No, you can't do that. So, if the kings can associate themselves with the one thing everyone can always see, the sun, then they're golden. So, what they do is they make Ra the official god over Horus. Now, first off, the first through the fourth dynasty is all the same dynasty. It's the same family in charge the whole time. That's more of a categorical thing of they changed over time. Like the first dynasty, when the pharaoh died, they killed the entire household. In the second dynasty, they didn't do that. In the third dynasty, they built shitty pyramids. In the fourth, they built Great One. I'm joking, but that really is the distinction between the third and the fourth. But yeah, so Ra, I am 10 minutes in and I've only gotten to the second god. So Ra is the sun god. So he is the god of the sun. And eventually, the mythology starts to change. You used to have it where Horus was the king of the gods, right? He was the most important. Now, because Ra is the king of the gods, you have to rewrite that, right? If you have a different king of the gods, if you have it where Horus is still at the same level of importance as Ra, then your attempt to associate your divine rule with Ra is less effective. So, what do? They go to the priesthood and essentially say, change the mythology. They carve out new myths, essentially. So they essentially engineer mythology to suit their needs. So, for example, in current, widely understood mythology, Horus is one of the youngest gods. He is the fourth king of the gods in that succession there. And he has to battle Set for it. But that's not how it would have been. I personally don't know enough about Egyptian historiography to tell you how it would have been. But there's no way Horus, being one of the youngest gods, would have been king of the gods in 3000 BC. And then, so let's shift focus. Ra is the guy for basically dynasties 3 through 10. What happens at 10? Set becomes the king of the gods. Why? Good question. So, from the 7th to the 10th dynasty, you have what's called the intermediate period. This is when the pharaonic power essentially collapses. For the first time in roughly 1,000 years, for the first time in 1,000 years, Egypt is no longer united. So you have all of these warring factions and these disparate people all vying for power, right? And who is the god that embodies that warring for power most? Oh wait, it's the god of war and trickery, Set. So Set becomes king of the gods for a while. But this intermediate period is very much frowned upon by both historians and the Egyptians. So when they get out of this intermediate period, during the Middle Kingdom, there starts to become a demonization of Set, because it was perceived as that he was the king of the gods, so he promoted this war. He promoted this fight between all of the Egyptians. So it was Set's fault that the dynasties collapsed, essentially. The Egypt collapsed. So they start to demonize him. And that is where you get these myths of Set being a horrible, trickerous, devious guy, right? He's just a little guy. No, he did some bad shit in the mythology. Anyway, so then after Set, you go to Montu. So Montu is another god of war from Thebes. Thebes is the main city in the south of Egypt. In the north, you have more urban areas like Memphis, Giza, Heliopolis, Heracliopis. Oh my god. Water. It's not water. So you have different power centers, right? So when Thebes becomes the capital during the 11th dynasty, they take the local war god Montu and try to make him the main god, but The 11th dynasty only lasted around 100 years, and they weren't that concerned with religion, really. So nothing really changes until we get to the 12th dynasty. The 12th dynasty is known as the height of the Middle Kingdom, right? It could also be argued to be the height of Egyptian power. It's one of the dynasties that was the strongest. I would say top 5. And they were also from Thebes. And they wanted to solidify their rule with a god that everyone worshipped. Ra, this entire time, had never really stopped being the most important god. He may have no longer been the king of the gods, but again, Set is this nebulous concept of war. How do you worship war? You can't. What is the one thing everyone is always exposed to? The sun. So his worship never dies. So here's what you do. What is a god that reflects the sort of spy-like nature that Thebes kind of seems to have? Amun. Amun is the god of unseen things. So essentially, if you can't see it, he's the god of it. Which means, as you could imagine, oh my god, Amun is the god of everything here. Because I closed my eyes. It's totally pointing here. Anyway, so he is combined with Ra into Amun-Ra. He is essentially a Theban version to create a new god by combining two old ones. Amun becomes one of the most important gods, period, because he is now the god of everything unseen. He is the god of the sky. He is the god of the sun. He is all of these things. So Amun-Ra kind of gets us to the very end of Egyptian history. He is the king of the gods for roughly 2,000 years. And the history doesn't reflect this, really. It's strange because Amun doesn't really have all that much, what's the word? He doesn't really do all that much in the mythology. Ra seems to take the center stage because, again, you always have the sun in the sky, but Amun is literally the god of the things you can't see. How do you worship that, right? What is associated, or he's the god of the things you can't see, so why do you care? Right? That's kind of the vibe I get from Amun's long worship. Because, like I said, he is the king. Amun-Ra, one guy, kinda, is the king of the gods from the 12th dynasty to the last. Most we'll get to Aten. But he is the king of the gods from the 12th dynasty to the last dynasty. When Cleopatra commits snakicide upon herself, he is still the king of the gods. So why is he less important to the mythology? Well, I don't know. And that's all you get. That is the end of that thought. Now let's get to Aten. I'm sure everyone who has watched this channel before knows who Aten is. The Amarna period is my favorite to talk about in Egyptian history because it's just so fascinating. Aten is the embodiment of the sun disk. He is not the god of the sun, so to speak. He is the physical manifestation of the disk of the sun we see in the sky. He is like late Greek interpretation of the difference between Helios and Apollo. Apollo was the god of the sun. Helios was the sun. Does that make sense? So, Aten was a local deity. Or, no, he was not a local deity. He was a less important deity that started to spread during Akhenaten's father's reign. And he kind of came out of this. So Amun-Ra had all of these faces, essentially, because you combine two gods, and these two were already very important. Ra is the god of a lot of things. Amun is the god of a lot of things. And they gain domains over time, especially when they're the most important god, right? Like, originally, Zeus was not the god of fatherhood, but that evolved over time. It's the same thing here. So, you have this, like, desire to portray Amun-Ra or Amun and Ra in these different ways. One of these ways was a sun disk with hands tilling the world. And that became Aten. Now, originally, he was just the same god as Ra. It was just a different way to interpret Ra. But then he starts to amass a worship of his own. And then Akhenaten, or Amunhotep IV, for reasons really unknown, makes Aten the supreme deity and then the only deity. He makes him the king of the gods, and then he makes him the only god. Which I guess you could perceive that, you know, there could be reasons for this. Like, he could be wanting to take power away from the priesthood. But when you look at it, it never feels like it's political to me. It always feels like... What it feels like is you gave some, like, 15-year-old kid the ability to make any OC he wanted, and then he made that OC the king of the gods. And then he got mad when people weren't happy with his OC. He actually wasn't all that young when he became king, and he was king for quite a while. Like 16 years? Anyway. And then... Is there really anything else to talk about? No, I think that's about it. So, Sora, you know what you did. Toxic, I'm sorry for being a dick last time. I hate you too. Beaky, here's your shout out. I mean, I'm so sorry I didn't give you one last time. What's up, Beaky? You're my third favorite West Virginian. Allie, what's good? How's across the pond? You having a good time in the land of fish and chips? Anyway, here is this totally disorganized, very poorly researched, and shitty video, quite frankly. See you soon. Friends, enemies, those still in a review. Bye.